string quartet, so 4 string players. They're the first, we call it violin 1, that's Bridget Dulkas. Violin 2 is Jeannie Skraki. And then viola is Pam Jacobson, and cello is Carter Dewberry. So it's a great gang of women string players, fantastic musicians.
And this is not the first incarnation of the String Consort. George Varga mentioned seeing you in 1970. I'm not sure if that was the String Consort or if it was with Butch Lacey and that configuration.
Yeah,
can you give us a little history of this?
So I think really in a neat way, Butch was the first one that I knew of that came up with this idea. So it was in the late 70s, and I was playing with Butch Lacey and other groups, and then he said, let's do this group with adding a string quartet to it. So he did all the writing for that, and I just loved it. So a few years passed after that, and then it must have been in the early 80s that I formed my own band of a string quartet, guitar, bass, and drums, and wrote a lot of music for that. We did that for a couple of years. Then time lapsed, and I got into other things, and it was about maybe a year and a half ago that we formed this group, and have been doing a lot for this last couple of years. We've played a bunch of shows, and we're planning on doing some recording about a CD of this music.
So what was it about this kind of configuration when you were playing with Butch? What was it that just grabbed you about it?
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing, because when you're talking about string, as the band gets bigger, it's more a vehicle for composition. There's plenty of improvising in this band, but you have to have some sense of organization because you have all these people, and typically the string players are not improvisers, so I have to write out all their parts. So as a vehicle for composing, it's awesome. It's sort of like a mini orchestra in a way, and string quartet has such a legacy through classical music. It's sort of a complete ensemble in its own right. So the idea of melding that complete ensemble with a jazz rhythm section, which is in a way a complete ensemble, pulling them together, pulling the idea of improvising versus written stuff. There's a lot in there that it interests me, and I still am interested, and I still have new ideas of different ways to go with it.
Right. Were you familiar with chamber music or classical music when you were when you came to that?
When I came to it, my first kind of way of coming to it was through Butch Lacey, and that was not classical music. It was jazz and kind of his own blend of folky jazz. And so I did, before I started writing, I did a bunch more research on traditional chamber music, classical chamber music, so Bartók and Bach and these kind of things. So I got a more sense of where they were coming from. So there is some of that influence in what we're doing.
There's another reference of potential influence. Chick Corea and Gary Burton's work in the 80s, I believe.
That's right. And that was another big influence on this group. Chick had a band with Chick and Gary Burton and then a string quartet. So he didn't have a rhythm section, but wonderful ensemble.
What was different about what they were doing than what you'd learned before?
It was very, in fact, in this group we're doing 2 of his pieces that he did with that group. So he had a big influence. I mean, Chick has been a big influence on my music, irregardless of the string quartet thing. Anyway, I love his writing and his playing, and so when he got into this, it has a big influence on me. I mean, some of my writing really kind of is in his world, and so I don't know if you've ever heard that band, but it's fantastic.
So then, what ways are you exploring this differently than Butch, or what you learn listening to Chick Corea and Gary Burton's version of this string thing?
Right. Well, one of the things is just different song types. Like in Chick's version, he didn't do any kind of swing tunes, and we have a couple. We do a blues. We do a song by Dave Brubeck called "The Duke," so it's a traditional great jazz standard. And then so that's sort of different. Butch, he did a couple of string tunes. Yeah, he did. So it was sort of similar. I think my writing is more like Chick influence than Butch, but anyway, there was some similarity there. Another thing that I'm really into is I'm really into folk music. So in this group we have two pieces that are a lot more folk-like. One of them is called The Beatles, and it's like a kind of a folky tune, and that's something that Chick never went towards, that I love. And guitar is such a natural for that, for kind of this folk guitar influence.
So, what was it in particular, and you may have even said this, that year and a half ago got you back interested? Was it the thought of doing this kind of writing again, or what was it that got this back going?
I think it was a couple of things. One of the things, that this group was always sitting there, but I did meet and hear, I heard this wonderful violinist, Bridget Dolkus, and so she's the first violinist, and she kind of is in a way the head of the string part of it. And so I heard her, and I just loved her sound and her playing, and I think it was a combination of that, and I think also that there became an opportunity to do a concert, and out of the blue, I forget where our first one was, but all of a sudden, hey, someone had remembered our band and wanted to do a concert, so that was the inspiration to bring it all back with this sort of new gang of string players, and it could have just stopped there, but it was such a hoot, it really went well, and so that inspired me to write some different material and to pursue this band more.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was the combination of these wonderful string players and a good and successful concert.
So I was talking to one of your band members who will remain nameless, but they were really wondering when you're going to record and when we're going to get a CD and some recorded material from the String Consort.
Yes. I think we have this one more concert in March, and my plan is after that concert, then that's when we'll head into the studio. And it's a pretty big endeavor because the music is really difficult, and it's a kind of a big group, and I can just see it taking a bit of time versus like a traditional jazz record where you can kind of go and crank it out in a day and a half or something. I think this is going to be a bigger deal, but.
So potentially by the end of 2009?
Yeah, you figure if we started it in end of March, you figure it's going to take a month to do, and then maybe a month. So a couple of months. So as summer starts creeping in, that's probably realistic to say then,
Excellent. Well, I appreciate you sharing those details, and I'll pass them on to the band.
Yeah.
Excited about that.
Yeah.
Well, you recently returned from a European tour supporting Diane Reeves, I was reading. Can you tell us a little bit about that tour and your work with Diane?
Yeah.
How far do you go back?
Well, it's pretty recent. I've loved her music for years, and I've played with both Jeffrey Keyser and Billy Childs, and they have both played with Diane. In fact, they're very involved. Like on Diane's last record, Billy arranged a couple tunes, played on some of the songs, as well as Jeffrey Keyser, and I guess it came that Diane needed a guitar player, and she said to Billy Childs, who to get? And he said, you got to get Peter. So it was awesome, man. I get a call, and it's a whole, some loose gigs here in the U.S., but then a whole two European tours that we did, and it was awesome. They just called me and you want the gig, and I didn't audition or anything. It was really flattering. And they just sent me the music, and they just expect you to just show up. The first gig, our first gig was at Royce Hall in UCLA, and short little rehearsal, and
really,
and so I really worked on the music. That's, I guess, part of it is I worked with Billy Childs, and he has some really hard music. I did this group he has called the Lyric kind of chamber jazz group, and very complicated music. And same thing, I was subbing for Larry Kuntz, the great guitarist, and they just expect me to learn the music. So it's kind of like I worked on that for about a month, just so that when I showed up, I was going to be cool. So it's a similar thing with Diane's. Her music wasn't as hard, but it was still somewhat tricky. So I did a lot of homework, and then it went really well. And then we did a whole European month-long in Europe this summer, and then we had about maybe a month and a half off, and then we did another European a tour that was longer, and it lasted up until right before Thanksgiving. And it was unreal, a great, fantastic band. Diane herself is just one of my favorite singers. I mean, one of the best singers I've ever heard, and all the details of touring were awesome. I mean, it was, kind of a bigger tour, so we had roadies and tour managers and not having to lift gear. I like that. So
you visited some pretty cool looking places. Can
We
you
did.
what were some highlight places for you?
well, we were in Thessaloniki, Greece, and that was really a nice stay. We were in Basel, Switzerland. It was a funny thing. This touring, it's so hardcore moving around that you, at times, are almost unclear what country you're in.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of, and you really don't get much time to goof around. It's really like kind of like wake up early, fly pretty much all day or half the day, get there, sound check, an hour to hang maybe, and then the gig, and then that kind of repeats. And a couple days off in the whole tour, but it is pretty busy. So we really went all over, and I guess one memorable time that it's kind of like, well, I am excited about Obama being president, and this whole tour, and we were going along, and we ended up on election night in Sarajevo at the American Embassy at a big party that they were throwing. They heard that we were in town, so they had us come over, and you know, that was kind of a big moment, having Obama be elected. And a lot of people will say, I remember exactly where I was when he got, you know, that kind of feeling. So it's funny because my story is that I was in this wild town and at the American Embassy, and it was like surreal. So that was one of our adventures.
Well, as we talk about traveling and where you're at and where you make your home every day, you've been here in San Diego for your whole life, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And grew up in North County, San Diego. Mm-hmm. And I was another thing I was when I was reading George Vargas. Did you read his piece on
really nice.
On the show that's coming up tonight?
Mm-hmm.
He mentioned that I believe it was Charlie Hayden had mentioned wondering why you had never moved to New York and achieved your deserved fame and fortune. So were there any thoughts of doing that? I'm sure there were.
There was. My flow is I got out of high school. I went to Boston for a moment and did a little summer program at Berkeley. Then decided, you know, I don't want to do the full thing. So I came back here because I kept coming to these places that really what I needed to do was practice my guitar a lot. And not as much, I didn't feel like I wasn't motivated to do the whole college thing, so I just practiced. And then that was good for a bunch of years, and then I started getting really antsy being here in San Diego. So then I did move to New York, and I stayed there for about a year. And I was pretty young. I was probably 21 or something like that, 22. And it was going really well for me there, but I just didn't like the place. I loved the music and I loved all the options, but I didn't like living in a city. And I really attribute it to having grown up here, just loving the ocean and loving some space and loving this life. And so I was there, and it didn't work. And then I bailed on that, and then I lived here, and things that really have gone well, and I did another point. I got answered. I moved to LA and lived there for a year, but the same thing happened. I just didn't like being in these cities, so I kind of gave up that thing, or actually it felt more like I got it out of my system. Mm-hmm. And I kind of felt like, yeah, I bet some other things would have happened with my career had I not lived here as much as I like it here, but lived in these meccas for music. LA and New York really are the main places. I think more would have happened, but I just liked my life too much here, and I guess the way I weighed it out is that, I have a good life, I get to make a lot of music, I still am connected with people in these other places. It's just been the right balance. I don't have any, I don't have any regrets about it. Yeah, I'm really happy about how it's all played out.
Excellent. Well, where can people find out more about you and what's going on in the studio and in your travels?
Mm-hmm. I have a bunch of different things going. A lot of different groups doing concerts, and then I do a lot of studio work and producing. And the best way for folks to stay in touch if they're interested is I have a website that's petersprague.com, and if you go there, there's a little page. Well, there's my calendar that tells where I'm playing. But there's also a page called I call it the Loop, and it's where you, if you're interested, you can join my email list, and every week I send out an email blip that says this is what's been going on, and there's usually some photos and hopefully a funny story here or there, and also where we're playing. So that's been really effective for me. It's been great to connect with people that way and let them know about what concerts are coming up.
Excellent. Well, again, it's a pleasure to have you at Jazz Live. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All righty.
Hey, Peter, while you're in the chair, I just want to get a quick ID from you.
Okay.
In the air.